After all this time, I have returned. They asked where I was. They wondered if I was on another hiatus. What happened to Wind Waker Unflooded? They asked. Where is he when we need him the most? Is the project still going on? Did it disappear? What's going on? And the truth is, I am still here. Progress is still being made, and we are back with a new video. This is Wind Waker Unflooded, the 3D modeling fan art project where I am reimagining the kingdom of Hyrule as it could have existed within the world and art style of The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker, corresponding the islands of the Great Sea to the unseen world of Hyrule down below that we never got to see in the art style of The Wind Waker. Only a small section of it, right? We saw Hyrule Castle, but nothing else of the world below. And I've always dreamed of, well, how would Hyrule look in that unique art style, corresponding to that unique world with all of its islands of the Great Sea. And now we have the power to find out, thanks to the power of creativity and 3D modeling. And this is Wind Waker Unflooded. So it is always a joy, and I'm really excited to work on some progress today. Today we're going to be looking at the area around the Islet of Steel. This is kind of in the map of Hyrule. This is kind of along the shoreline, the riverbanks of the River Hylia that lead to Lake Hylia. And so that's really the section of the map that I'm going to be working on today, filling in the terrain, and later I'll talk about some of my creative decisions around the Islet of Steel itself, which is, of course, has been translated into being part of the City in the Sky from Twilight Princess in this project, right? I'm very comfortable stealing elements from other games. That is something I am comfortable with. I know I've gotten comments that are like, well, you know, if I was making the map, I'd really only want to focus from areas from Ocarina of Time, right? Wind Waker is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, and when Wind Waker originally came out, Ocarina of Time was the only 3D version of Hyrule that we had explored up to this point. And so that's the only game that the developers of Wind Waker would have been pulling from prior to Wind Waker as far as 3D versions of Hyrule go. And I guess, yeah, I do want to respond to that idea because, to me, I mean, every game that takes place in Hyrule is a part of the same world, and even with timeline, placements aside, it's like, well, I think that there's elements from other games that could have been just off screen during the events from Ocarina of Time. So I can reconcile, like, well, maybe the Akala Citadel or Hateno Village or the Great Plateau, maybe those still existed during the events of Ocarina of Time. We just never got to explore them as a player. So I can reconcile those points, and I guess just I am comfortable with the benefit of hindsight, with all of the creativity that Nintendo has brought into the Zelda series after Wind Waker, with how Hyrule appeared in Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. And I don't want to ignore that, right? I want this to be a version of Hyrule that feels fully fledged and true to the spirit of what Hyrule has been throughout the series, right? And I guess, like, that's the thing, right? It's like, this is not Hyrule as it could have existed in the original game, The Wind Waker. This is not what the developers would have made 20 years ago. Like, this is not that project. This is not a pseudo-archaeological experiment where I'm trying to imagine what the developers would have made back then, originally, right? Like, no, I have the benefit of hindsight. This is a fan project, and I'm making this in 2024, right? And all of these years later, and I'm not pretending that it could have been made back then, which I think is fine, and I think it's fine to have that perspective, and I'm not disagreeing with that philosophically, but to me, that's not my stance, right? I recognize that it's like, well, this isn't what Wind Waker could have been back then. This is my own stance on how this version of Hyrule could look, borrowing elements from throughout the Zelda series, right? And my own creativity, right? Injecting my own ideas of what I want to see in the world and what I want to offer it. And I really love that about the project. I love how much room there is for creativity. Because, right, like especially when I'm pulling elements from other games, there's things that you have to reconcile, and there's kind of, you have to kind of look and fill in the gaps and figure out how things mesh together, because there are inconsistencies, there are contradictions in the maps of Hyrule, as I'm sure a lot of y'all are very attuned to. And so those are things that definitely, like, it's fun and it's exciting to parse through that. But I feel a lot of freedom with this project, and that's what excites me about it. I feel some responsibility to try to do things right by making it feel right, whatever feels right for the map. And it's hard to say, well, what feels right? Does that mean trying to be accurate to taking priority to a certain game? Like what does that mean, right? And to me, it's like, well, there is a general philosophy of like, well, to me, timeline-wise, my map takes place right before the Great Flood, so that does, that gives me a framework from which to approach what is right for my project. But it is also like, well, it's my version of the world, and it's what is right for it is, in accordance with my own creativity. And I guess, like, I don't know, I think it's cool that, like, every fan of Zelda might have their own interpretation of what Hyrule could have looked like in Wind Waker, right? I think this map could have been done 100 different ways by 100 different people. And that's something that I think is really cool. And I guess just, like, I don't know, I feel aware that Nintendo is very loose with how they approach Hyrule's geography. And so to me, the right way to approach this is just as loose, right? To be aware that, like, well, what comes first is not an adherence to history or past geography. No, I think what comes first is creativity. I think that's the way Nintendo would approach it, right? I think that that's something that they show, that they celebrate through their development history, right? Creativity comes first, right? What is the most exciting? What's the most fun, right? It doesn't necessarily matter what's consistent or accurate to the past, right? That's part of the theme of the Wind Waker itself, right? Is moving forward despite adherences to tradition, right? Being able to move through that. Anyway, I'm rambling, but these are all things that you have to think about when you take on projects like this. And it's been a joy to navigate so many things and to have a reason to look at the Wind Waker in new ways. And really, maybe that's one of the main reasons that I do this project, is because I love that game and I love the Zelda series and I love having a reason to look at it and ask questions and be attentive to things and dig in deep about how it, constructs its world, right? That's it's great to have a reason to do that. Just as a fan, I wanted to give myself a reason to, quote unquote, conduct research, right? To look into these games deeper, and think about them more deeply, right? And it's been fun, rewarding, and it's been incredibly interesting to kind of peel back some of the layers and think about these things, right? And think about the way that Nintendo makes their maps. Think about the way that Hyrule can exist in different games. And yeah, it's been really fun. And I've really enjoyed doing this fan project. And I hope that there's a lot of things that y'all can take away from watching. And I hope that y'all feel encouraged to take on your own projects. Because this is something that, like, I don't know, like, I made it because I would have been happy waiting for someone else to make it, but I wanted to see it made. And I didn't see anyone else trying. And it's been really interesting to, as I've made it, I've gotten comments and emails from people that have told me, like, they've said that, like, it's so funny because I was working on a project like this and it just wasn't public, but I wanted to try putting these things together, thinking about what the underwater version of Hyrule could have looked like. And so it's been really funny to see that and see that, like, well, like, no one on the internet was really making this 3D model of Wind Waker Unflooded, right? But there was a desire amongst Zelda fans, even unspoken, right, to see this world. And it's been really awesome to see how many people have resonated with this desire since making these videos and having a YouTube channel and broadcasting it. So it's just like, it's been rewarding to tap into something like that. Which, yeah, it's like there's been a zeitgeist there. And of course, like, there have been, like, illustrated maps that have appeared on the internet for years, and that's what has inspired my project, was this map made by Jacob Zachariah. And that has been the basis for which I have made my geography decisions, adhering to his version of the map. And he made a lot of decisions creatively about, like, well, how would Hyrule look? How could it look in a way that matches up with the geography of the sea chart that we have in Wind Waker, with all of its islands, right, being turned into mountains? What would that look like? Does it make sense? Do the locations match up, right? And so he did a lot of the legwork for which I have based my project off of. So that's all the background. So I am assuming that this video, just because it's been a couple of weeks since I've made a video, I'm assuming that there's a lot of new people in the audience. But I also know that a lot of y'all have been following this project for at this point, give or take about a year and a half. And I really hope that y'all have enjoyed seeing the progress. And I know I've gotten comments from people, and I always appreciate this. People that tell me how much progress they've seen and how exciting that's been, because it's come a long way. And even in the past year, right, it's come a long way. And hopefully it's not too much longer before the project's done. I mean, to me, my goals are to finish this map, this 3D model of the map. And I do want to make cutscene style short films that are animated in this world, retelling essentially the lead up to the Great Flood, right? What was it like for Ganondorf to return? What was this last stand against the King of Evil, right? How did he return? And right, just like what was the kingdom going through, and why was it so bad that a flood was inevitable, right? Why did things get that bad, right? What led to the waters rising? And that's a story that I'm definitely very interested in telling. And if y'all are interested in that, then stay subscribed and and stay tuned for more, because that definitely interests me. And I've begun starting to write that, and it's been really fun to kind of start to figure out from a story perspective too. Because of course there's environmental storytelling that is that is purely a part of the model as well. And so I've had to think about the narrative just as a 3D modeler. But of course, there's also storytelling, in a script form. So, and those are different things. But it is all narrative, right? And I think it's been really interesting to think about a map making project as a narrative project, because that's definitely something that I haven't really considered before doing this project. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the Islet of Steel and the City in the Sky, because you may be seeing at this part of the time lapse. I'm not exactly sure how the timing is going to line up as I'm recording this voiceover, but I made a decision to create this ramp going up to the City in the Sky, because I thought that the people down below in Hyrule, well, there's a question of like, well, how would they get up to the City in the Sky, right? It's this ancient floating city, and maybe back in the day there was some technology to get up there. Maybe the people that lived there had their own devices or wings or whatever it was. But how would a modern person living in Hyrule that is maybe doing archaeology, or maybe there's people looting the old City in the Sky, whatever it is, how would they get up there? And one of the methods that I thought was like, well, it would be silly, it wouldn't be practical, but in this specific cartoon style version of Hyrule, it might just work. A giant ramp, right, that goes from the ground floor of Hyrule, spiraling all the way up, like a spiral staircase, all the way up, like it's a giant pole leading up to the City in the Sky. And I've had a couple of these like super tall towers, right, as I've like kind of expanded like some of the sea platforms that we used to see in the original Wind Waker game, and extrapolating them as being giant towers. And I enjoy that. I think it's a really like striking part of the detail of the map landscape. And even if it's not practical, even if it's not realistic, and it's something that I do think is like striking, at least to my eye, at least in accordance to my creativity. And so to me, it's like, well, yeah, it's not a practical solution, but it is, to me, striking in some way. It's dramatic, right? And it's something that, maybe Link wouldn't use something like that. Maybe he would be launched out of a cannon or whatever it is. Maybe a tornado would take him up to the City in the Sky. Who knows whatever it is. But I do love the image of just this giant, impractical ramp, right? That is all like kind of spun around this giant, it's this very thin pole, right? Stretching all the way down. And so I love that idea. Because yeah, I mean, this world is a cartoon, right? And I think Wind Waker is so special because it rewards you for taking its world seriously. It really does. But it is still a cartoon, and it still threads that needle of you can take it seriously. It has really deep messages, right? It has so much to say, to articulate. The original game does, right? And the Wind Waker with its story that is really deep, what it has to say about family, about tradition, about religion, about history, right? About politics even. And some of the stuff is, it may not be Shakespeare, but it does have a lot to articulate and a lot of serious messages, right? It's a story about the apocalypse, right? And it is a post-apocalyptic world, but it's a message of hope in that even after tragedy, the world will continue, and maybe it will be forever shaped by the tragedy. Maybe there's a lot of things that will be lost. But Wind Waker, of course, is talking about the grief that you can have over that loss, and how to move past it, right? That's very mature. That's very heavy. And it's something that I think Wind Waker does extremely well. And so it's this balance between this very serious story, right, in a way, right? But it's a world that is also full of goofiness and joy and laughter. And I think that that's intentional, is that this story about moving on from the apocalypse is also something that lets you laugh, right? That lets you imagine these fantastical things, right? You have the Tower of the Gods, right, which is also this very lean, tall structure that is almost like otherworldly. So, right, it's a strange kind of skyscraper in the middle of the ocean, right? There's all these kinds of things that are silly, impractical structures that are a part of this fantasy world. And I think it's intentional. I think it's purposeful that, you know, this world that you can take seriously, and you're rewarded for doing so. But Wind Waker is also saying that, well, this is also this is something that is supposed to bring you joy ultimately, right? It's about finding joy in the darkness, and I think that's kind of why it approaches being a cartoon. I think that's something that is really benefited by its art style. That's part of why I really want to reimagine Hyrule in its art styles, because it has its own perspective. It's not just a visual distinction. It's a philosophical distinction in the creativity, in the creative approach to making a world like that. But anyway, before I ramble anymore, it might be about time to wrap up the video. So, you know, once again, I apologize that it's been a couple of weeks since I've done a video. I definitely want to keep updating more often. I know the holiday season's approaching, so I'm probably, you know, I'm not going to be very available then. But I do want to keep making videos, because this is a project I want to keep willing away at. I want to, you know, definitely reward y'all that have been watching for a long time and let y'all see tangible progress. I'd love to finish this project up next year. I mean, we'll see. We'll see how long it takes, but I'd love for Wind Waker Unflooded to be done in 2025. So I would love to get to that point. And so, yeah, just stay updated, keep commenting y'all's ideas. That makes a huge difference, giving me y'all's inspiration and encouragement and ideas and feedback, because that's something that definitely makes a difference on this project. That helps me decide what to work on next. And I try to make sure that whenever I'm doing something that has been suggested, that I credit whoever suggested it. And I love having a dialogue with an audience like that. And I'm really excited to get back into working on the project again, because it has been a long time. Because, yeah, I mean, I've been busy. But a way that y'all can make sure that I prioritize working on this project is, of course, becoming a member on Patreon. I'm not going to plug that too much, because I have a pre-recorded way of plugging all that. So without further ado, how about I hand y'all over to the recording? Without further ado, see y'all later. Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.